Whenever you're ready. Welcome, everybody. All right. Today we're talking about a really kind of strange, interesting topic. It's coming from more of a therapeutic perspective from the therapist towards the client. But I think it has a lot of insight for different people because everybody's always interested in psychology. I like the psychology. So if you like psychology and you like self-help and you like all that stuff, this is probably a good show because it comes at it from different perspectives of the theories that are the basic theories that are taught people in the field of psychology. And what's really important to understand is all of the major theories that were created in the field of psychology were created before insurance. And insurance lays down the details of what diagnoses you can give, what kind of theories you can use, whether or not you can or cannot use those theories with different people. Because different theories require different amounts of sessions. And so insurance companies, being very financially focused and less client focused, are going to only endorse certain theories that give them the outcomes that they want at the quickest possible juncture. Now, even if you have like an employee assistance program, you're going to get 3 sessions or 6 sessions, and that's it. So the deal is, as a person studying psychology, you cannot buy any of these particular theories in particular, unless you have cash pay clients that are willing to pay cash, especially if you're going to do Freudian psychoanalytic psychology and sit there for 5,000 years trying to figure out what their mother did to them. But the bottom line is that you're going to have to pull from all of these theories to come up with a very individually suited treatment strategy for your clients. So you have to be fairly creative. They don't teach that in college. They don't teach that in your graduate degree. They don't teach it in your doctorate degree. Where you learn that is doing the job, and that's why it takes 3,000 clinical hours before you can actually even test to work in the field of psychology. Psychological perspectives are different ways of thinking about and explaining human behavior. There's no one size fits all approach to studying and understanding human mind, human behavior. That's why people in this field of psychology utilize a variety of perspectives while studying how people think, how people feel, how they behave, and exploring different perspectives that give us fuller, rich way to look at psychology. So there's many perspectives that we have to think about. There is one is called a psychodynamic perspective, which focuses on the unconscious influences of our mind. Now, the early years of psychology were dominated by a succession of different schools of thought. If you've taken a psychology course, you might remember learning about structuralism, functionalism, psychoanalysis, behaviorism, humanism, all of which are different schools of psychological thought. So, psychodynamic perspective is the unconscious influences, the things that we don't think about, where we have what are called automatic thoughts, automatic behaviors that we do based on automatic thoughts, and we basically function that way. Now, how we want to think about it from a psychoanalytic perspective is people have various resentments in their life, and people that form resentments or form trauma have an opinion about a certain thing. So if I go into Walmart and I'm scared to death because I've been at war and I think somebody's going to shoot my head off, I'm probably going to search when I go through Walmart for the evidence that somebody's going to do that. So I'm going to look at some psychotic person on crack. There might be a lot of those in Walmart. There, or people that are in various forms of dysfunction, people that look kind of loose in their gait or rather unsafe. And I'm going to look at all these characters and I'm going to start collecting evidence as I walk through Walmart that I'm going to be shot or I'm going to be killed or I'm going to be traumatized by one of these creatures. And so as we go through, we have a narrative. And the narrative means I'm only going to filter my experiences through the collection of what I believe is evidence that the things that I believe are going to happen are going to happen. So, for instance, if I have a relationship with my spouse and I think my spouse is a jerk, everything that I do talking to my spouse is going to be filtered through the idea that my spouse is a jerk. So I'm going to look for the words they use and all the things they say and all the things that I determine relate back to the idea that they're a jerk. And I'm going to reinforce my ideas back to them, and that's a filter in which I'm going to talk to my spouse. You're a jerk, I'm not. And here's all the evidence that I've collected that you are a jerk from all the 25 years of being married to you. I have so much evidence that you're a jerk, including this last conversation, this last sentence that you said to me, that you made a judgment call about me. I'm going to filter you through all of those traumatic events that I call resentment. And that is how I perceive you. And I can't leave that book because I wrote that book about you, which means I know everything about you. It's all in the book I wrote about you. And these are things you will never admit to. Now, that book that I write is only going to be 0.02% of my experiences with you. However, that's how I'm going to refer to you. Through my book that I wrote about you, filled with resentment, looking for the words to reinforce that I am right, that you are a jerk, or you think I am a jerk. And that's how we're going to go through life, is going through that filter. So that's unconscious thought. And that's why in Freudian style therapy, where they do a thing called free association, where you lay on the couch, the therapist, you can't even see them, or they're behind you writing notes, they're trying to collect all the resentments and all the filters you have created in your life. Then there's a behavioral perspective. It looks like learning via associations and reinforcement. So if I'm going to say, okay, my kid did this terrible thing, so I'm going to take their phone away. That's behavior modification. So a behavioral perspective is you do something and then there's a negative or a positive stimulus based on the fact that you did this thing. Then there's a cognitive perspective that focuses on how we think and how we process information. For instance, from a cognitive perspective, there's a huge difference between an expectation, which most people that are depressed and anxious operate by, and a I wish I would prefer. So I prefer that you would do this. Now, if we did everything filtered through I prefer, we would not have resentment. We would not have anger. We would not have failure. We'd not have betrayal that is attached to expectations. So if a person thinks through preferences instead of expectations, now we have a path of least resistance. Then there's a biological perspective. It's concerned with the brain and genetic influences. So, for instance, an ADHD person. An ADHD person is basically a hunter-gatherer. That's what we are as a society. 30% of our society is genetically predispositioned as hunters. That's what ADHD people are. Do we need hunters? No. We have grocery stores. So if you want a hunter to be stimulated, you put them in a video game, which is a linear hunting experience, and it's going to be like crack to them. And then you're going to ask them to brush their teeth, and they're going to say, what? Brush my teeth? I'm about ready to win this game. I'm about ready to kill the deer. How dare you ask me if I'm going to brush my teeth? So they throw their temper tantrums because they love to hunt. So they love to do what they love to do, but they're genetically created to do that. That means all of their sensory perceptions are 5 times greater than the gatherer. So naturally, you stick them in a classroom and stick them there for 8 hours a day, listen to some teacher that goes drones on and on about their same old crap every day, the kid's going to be bored to tears. So what are you going to do? You're going to drug them. You're going to drug them and stimulate them so their brain is stimulated so they'll calm down and become a gatherer. That's the only way you can do it because they're genetically predispositioned as hunters. That's a genetic psychology. Then there's this cross-cultural perspective. It emphasizes how culture affects behavior and thought. So let's look at Asian culture. Asian culture, Asian mom, it's a job to be a mother. I love my kid, but I love them because I want them to be successful so they can give me money when I'm older and take care of me and take care of their dad, who's probably not as important as me as the mother. And I'm going to have to make sure they have guilt and shame how they treat their mother, because you owe me, because I had to put up with so much crap trying to raise you and put you in the best school and put you in the best opportunity and buy your house when you got married and do all these great things for you. I'm going to guilt and shame the hell out of you. But is that love? Well, to them, that is. Now, to other people, to have a loving mother is a whole different concept in a different culture. Let's say the United States. So you got the mother. The mother is supposed to love you unconditionally. That means they will do anything for you. They care about your emotional well-being. Asian mother could give a rat's ass about your emotional well-being. You better do what's right, and you better have guilt and shame attached to it. A mother in the United States, just regular old whitey in the Midwest, is probably gonna, offer you the love and support that they need. Oh, their teacher is treating them badly. Oh, this person is disrespecting them. They're more worried about the emotional context than they are necessarily about the content. They want their kid to be treated well so they feel like they are accepted by society and play a great role in society, but they're not going to be as emphasizing survival and being on the best possible student there is on the planet Earth and the most genius human being that ever existed in the field, the way they operate, and being the doctor, the lawyer, or the whatever they have to be, the corporate leader or whatever that an Asian culture is going to put forward. So love is seen as different things. That's a cross-cultural psychology. Then there's an evolutionary perspective, and that's natural selection and inheritance. So from an evolutionary perspective, there's strong people, there's weak people. So women look for genetically, that evolutionary wise, they look for soldiers. They love soldiers. Soldiers are strong. Soldiers are loyal. Soldiers are great providers. Soldiers will do what's right for their kids generally. But are they deep? No, they're not deep, but they're about 36% of the male population genetically. So the deal is, are you going to have the deep, dark discussion? Are you going to have the Socratic dialogue? Are you going to have the deep, dark debate with your spouse that's a soldier? No, they do their duty. They do what they have to do. They raise their kids. They do all the right things. They provide. They get the house. They get all the things. They put up with their wife's bullcrap. But the bottom line is, they're not going to have the deep, dark discussion with their spouse, who's always going to complain that they don't like to do what they like to do. They don't, we don't have deep conversations. We don't have the deep connection. No, because they're not built that way. That's called evolutionary psychology. But the bottom line is, you picked him because he was evolutionary wise, probably a better provider than it would have been to marry the English professor that's probably never going to have more than $60,000 a year. So, think about it. That's how evolutionary psychologies work. Now, the humanistic perspective focuses on growth and fulfillment. So that's a social strategy. That's an idea of how well do you fit in? Where are you accepted? Where are you not accepted? Because where you accepted is going to be where you feel the most at home. That's where you're going to be the most of who you are, is where you feel accepted. Now, the more you have self-acceptance, which is altruistically, what a humanist is looking for is human self-acceptance, because if you can accept yourself and know who you are and make decisions in this life, you have what's called character, which teaches people how to love you. So the bottom line is, from a humanistic perspective, the idea is you have personal self-acceptance. You're at home anywhere you are in your life because you're not reliant on other people to accept you. You accept yourself for who you are, and what your limitations are. All right, we're going to take another a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk more about psychological theories and break them down. So come back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about psychological theory, and we got to start way back in the square root of Sigmund Freud, psychoanalytic theory. It's a psychodynamic, and it's a perspective originated with Sigmund Freud. This view of psychology and human behavior emphasized the role of the unconscious mind, early childhood experiences, interpersonal relationships to explain human behavior, as well as to treat mental illness. And there's Sigmund Freud's work and influence in psychoanalysis became one of the earliest major forces in psychology because he conceived of the mind as being composed of three different elements: the id, the ego, and the superego. So, what is the id? The id is the part of the psyche that includes all the primal unconscious desires. The ego is the aspect of the psyche that must deal with the demands of the real world. So that is your functional part of yourself. The superego is the last part of the psyche to develop, and it's tasked with managing all our internalized morals, standards, and ideals. And while the psychodynamic perspective is not as dominant today, it continues to be a very useful tool. And so it's important to understand with that psychodynamic perspective that that is the beginnings of the understanding of how the brain works. Now, there's this thing that came out in the 30s called transactional analysis. Now, if you were in the 70s, you'd probably remember the book, the I'm okay, you're okay. So, transactional analysis basically deals with the ego, the id, and the superego. And what it does is it determines that in every person there is a parent, an adult, and a child. A parent, an adult, and a child. And here is the premise of understanding. Your adult mind is only formed once in your life. So if you're a parentified child, at 9 years old, you're starting to have to make adult decisions because your worthless breeding stock parents did not pay attention to you and were so focused on their penis and vagina and their stupid jobs and all the other things that they prioritize, like their cars, their homes, their money, and all their friends and all their alcohol, drugs, or whatever the hell they were diverted with. If you were raised in parents like that who could give a rat's ass whether you lived or died, you probably became your own parent. You had to become an adult at a young life. And guess what? That meant because your parents were worthless as tits on a boar hog, that you had to raise yourself. And that means your adult mind forms at a young age. And now, as you go into your adult life, you're going to have a lot of immature reactions to life and a lot of immature judgments and a lot of lack of forgiveness because you don't learn how to forgive at a young age that easily, especially you have worthless parents and terrible role models. And you're probably not going to be that great at being married, so you're probably going to be divorced a lot because unless you swore that you never get divorced, so you just sit in your miserable marriage for the rest of your life because you don't know how to be married because you had to be adult at a young age, and whoever you married is going to be upset because you're stubborn and you think you know everything because you're narcissistic because you think you're an adult and more mature than everybody else and know more than everybody else. So you go into life with your adult brain formed at 9 years old. And does that mean you can't evolve? Yes, you can. Does that mean you can't change? Of course you can. Does that mean you're not going to, you're always going to be in your 9-year-old reactive brain? No, maybe your children will require you to be maybe 12. But, the bottom line is you're going to be kind of stuck with that adult brain operating at a 9-year-old strategy. And so many people get frustrated because they make a lot of immature choices and they don't understand why. They don't understand why they had so many bad judgments. And that's because they formed that adult brain at too early an age. That is your psychodynamic theory. Now, going back to transactional analysis. So, for instance, you come home and your wife says, or your husband, you said you were going to wash the dishes. You didn't wash the dishes. Now I had to wash the dishes. Why didn't you wash the dishes? And so the person that comes home goes, yeah, you're right, I didn't wash the dishes. That's what they think in their mind. But they go, you know what? Why are you acting like you're my parent and I'm a child? I'm going to start arguing with you. So I'm either going to walk away and feel disgusted because you didn't like the fact I didn't wash the dishes, Or I'm going to go, okay, well, what about the other day when you forgot to wash the dishes? Then I'm going to do what's called crosstalk. I'm going to debate you because you're treating me like a child. So if you're going to marry an egotistical asshole that loves to tell you how wrong you are and what the terrible things you did, especially somebody that has to parent 5,000 kids that you bred them with, and that's all they do is parent all day long, you're probably going to be rather frustrated because you're going to be treated like a child and you're not going to like it. And what you're going to do is defy them and act even more like a child because you're upset because they're confronting you like a child. So, transactional analysis means if you want to have a peaceful relationship, you've got to have more transactional dialogue, which is called adult to adult. We do it at work, but we don't always do it at home. And what that means is I'm really upset because you didn't wash the dishes. I had to wash the dishes. I would like you to wash the dishes the next time you promise me. That would be great. Okay, that would be an adult confrontation. Unfortunately, people that are living in their little parent brain, they're going to parent all day long, and that's all they're going to do is treat people like that. So, what we're talking about is psychodynamic theory and how it operates. Now, there's this other perspective. If your layperson's idea of psychology has always been about people in laboratories wearing white coats watching rats try to negotiate mazes in order to get their dinner, then you're probably thinking about behavioral psychology. Now, behavioral psychology and behaviorism is different from most other approaches because they view people and animals as controlled by their environment, and specifically that we are the result of what we've learned from our environment. So, the behaviorist perspective is concerned with how environmental factors called stimuli affect observable behavior called the response. So the behaviorist perspective proposes two main processes whereby people learn from their environment, namely what's called classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning involves learning by association. Operant conditioning involves learning from the consequences of a behavior. So, classical condition was studied by Ivan Pavlov, and through looking into natural reflexes and neutral stimuli, he managed the condition of dogs to salivate at the sound of the bell by repeatedly associating the sound of the bell with food. The principles of classical conditioning have been applied in many therapies. These include systematic desensitization for phobias, step by step exposed to a feared stimulus at once, and aversion therapy. So, B.F. Skinner was a famous psychologist, investigated operant conditioning of voluntary and involuntary behavior. So Skinner felt that some behavior could be explained by the person's motive. Therefore, behavior occurs for a reason. And the three behavior techniques shaping were positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishment. Behavioralism also believes that scientific methodology, controlled experiments, and that only observable behavior should be studied because this can be objectively measured. Behaviorism rejects the idea that people have free will and believes that the environment determines all behavior. And it is the scientific study of observable working on the basis that behavior can be reduced to learned stimulus response units. And it's been criticized in the way it underestimates the complexity of human behavior. So many studies in animals, which are hard to generalize to humans, for example, the speed in which we pick up learning, there must be biological factors involved. But here's the bottom line: behaviorism. You have a 12-year-old, give him a behavior contract. So what happens is behavior contract says you can't talk back, you got to get better, you got to get above a B, and you got to do your chores. So if you don't do any of these things, you're going to lose your cell phone for a day. If you apologize for not doing one of those three things, you're going to lose it for a half a day. Now, it has to be a real apology. Now, I'm going to warn you that, hey, I'm going to give you like a 3 count and say, hey, you haven't done your chores. If you don't do your chores, I'm going to give you take your phone away from a day. So I'm going to count to 3. So you give them a chance, and that's called a neutral, a negative stimulus. Now, a punishment is taking the phone away because they didn't do the thing. Once again, the apology gives them back a half a day. So then they do it again. They don't do their grades. Let's say they don't do their homework. So guess what? This is a 5 day week, and you have not done your homework today, and this is a second consequence. So you're going to lose your phone for 3 days without an apology. Now, let's say you do it again. Now you're going to lose your phone all the way for 7 days straight. Now, let's say you don't do any of these consequences for 5 days, any of these bad behaviors. That means that on Saturday, you're going to get a reward. So you get to play your video game 1 hour extra on that day as a reward for not doing your negative behavior, not doing these bad behaviors, or doing these good behaviors that you need to do. That's a behavior contract. That's kind of how it operates. And people respond to that. It takes all of the psychology out of it, and it just creates a reward system, positive, negative, neutral, that you're able to implement and get your kids to do what they need to do. And you don't have to argue with them because they are holding themselves accountable for what they did. They're in charge of their consequences, not you. So you're not the bad guy. Then there's this weird humanistic perspective, and it's a psychological perspective that emphasizes the study of the whole person, known as holism. Humanistic psychologists look at human behavior not only through the eyes of the observer, but through the eyes of the person doing the behaving. So here's the deal: humanists don't argue about, I need you to agree with me. Humanists do not argue about, I need you to align with my point of view. Humanists only work on understanding and compassion for understanding your perspective. So you think I'm a total whatever jerk and you can't stand me because of this, that, and the other. I can see how you see that. I can see how you see me that way. It hurts me that you have to feel that way, and I'm very sorry that you feel that way. I have great compassion with the burden you carry for thinking of me the way you think of me. Humanism respects perspectives. It even apologizes for someone else's perspective of you. And by doing that, there is respect for each other. And what that does is it takes away the propensity for anger, irritability, and rage and resentment. And all of these things get in the way of our relationships, because if we offer understanding and we have questions and we have concerns from where a person's coming from and how they see things without judging them for it, we are accepting the whole human being. Humanistic psychologists believe that an individual's behavior is connected to the inner feelings and the self-image. Humanistic perspective centers on the view that each person is unique and individual and has the free will to change at any time in his or her life. That perspective, humanism, suggests that we are each responsible for our own happiness and well-being as humans. So what that means is, it is understood that each of us is responsible to, number one, understand what our will is and how to tap into it. That means we understand that we all have to survive, and you cannot depend on someone else to survive. You have to survive on your own, and you also have the choice of whether or not your attitude is going to get in your way. So, if I'm going to go through life seeking joy, doesn't mean I'm going to have joy, doesn't mean I'm going to have happiness, but I'm looking for chances to seek joy. I'm probably going to find joy in a lot of circumstances that are even negative and strange. I'm going to probably find humor in a lot of things that are out there and a lot of the struggles that all of us go through. I'm probably going to embrace the fact that each of us, each human being, suffers in this life. And if I'm going to have a deep connection to all people or any person, it's all readily available by understanding how each of us suffers. And if I took the time to figure out how your life has made you suffer and how the experiences you have had made you suffer, I'm going to connect on a humanistic level. And this focus on the person and their personal experiences, their subjective perception of the world, the humanists regard as scientific methods as inappropriate to study behavior because scientific methods are cookie cutter. They're all thinking that all of us are equal and the same, and all of us are based on the same perspectives. We are not. We are very different. We are very subtle. We are all kinds of gray, and we love to black and white everything in this life to make it stupid and simple. But black and white thinking is really dumb because from a humanist perspective, you're never going to know the person. You're just going to walk through life labeling everything as you're a criminal, you're an idiot, you're unsafe, you're a nice person, you're attractive, you're this, you're that, and that's the filter I'm going to see you through for the rest of my life. And if that's how you operate, black and white thinking, and a lot of people do that, they label people and then they operate as if they're that label, the insanity begins. Humanism requires us to all understand what forgiveness is about. Forgiveness is the ability to care about what your intentions are rather than your outcomes. I care about where you're coming from. I care about what made you decide to do this stupid thing. What made you think that? How did you come up with that idea? That's called forgiveness. That's what humanists do. Now, all of us want to be humanists, but all of us in this society today, where people are batshit crazy and all stuck in their ideas that their hypothesis about everybody else is exactly correct and that they're going to refer to them as if they are that, they are deranged. There's a lot of derangement in our culture where people just see through people through one lens. And we do a lot to promote that as idiots in this world. We love to promote the idea and we love to put ourselves out there as anarchists and idiots that make us all believe that you're just an idiot. But the bottom line is we're not. We're all very subtle. We all have our triggers. We all have our stupid, but we're all very different in many, many ways and very similar in many, many ways. Now, there's another thing called a cognitive perspective. Psychology was institutionalized as a science in 1879 by Wilhelm Wundt, who found the first psychological laboratory. And his initiative was soon followed by other European and American universities. And these early laboratories, through experiments, explored areas such as memory and sensory perception, of which Wundt believed to be closely related to psychological or sociological and psychological processes in the brain. And the whole movement that evolved from the early philosophers like Aristotle and Plato, today this approach is known as cognitive psychology. Now, cognitive psychology is based on what's called the Socratic method. Now, the Socratic method is also an educational model. Socratic method means that we go to a classroom, we all read the same book, we all look at the first chapter, and each of us came to different conclusions based on the first chapter. We each also did research and understood different interpretations of the first chapter. And what we do in class is we each discuss each other's perspective on the first chapter of the book and hear each other without refuting each other. We actually understand that each of us interprets things differently. And by gathering that in a group and understanding that we're all coming at the first chapter of the book in a different way, we are facilitating philosophical discussion. And that is where cognitive psychology begins. Cognitive psychology revolves around the notion that if we want to know what makes people tick, then the way to do it is to figure out what processes are actually going on in their minds. In other words, psychologists from this perspective study cognition, which is the mental active process by which knowledge is acquired. That is what the philosophers did on the steps of the Acropolis, sitting around talking about a particular problem, and each of them coming to different discussion and different approaches to that very problem, and hearing each other and then debating each other about each other's perspective without disrespecting each other. All right, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about cognitive, and then we're going to go into the biological. So come back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about psychological theories and how psychology works. We're talking about cognitive. Cognitive psychologists to explain that memory comprises of basically three stages: encoding, where information is received and attended to; storage, where the information is retained; and retrieval, where the information is recalled. And it isn't a scientific approach and typically uses lab experiments to study human behavior, but cognitive approach has many applications, including cognitive therapy and eyewitness testimony. But the bottom line is cognitive means there's more views than just yours. And what we have to do is take different positions in cognitive therapy to decide where we want to arrive. Cognitive therapy really is about a person locking in on a certain perspective without the willingness or the ability to see things from any different. What cognitive psychology does is it challenges where a person is stuck and allows them to get perspectives that loosen up that thought and free up those thoughts so they can begin having better understanding and being able to associate and affiliate and accept the fact that other people see things differently. What that means is it's a striving towards peace. What is peace? Peace is the ability to accept the unacceptable. So that means that we have to understand that we accept an unacceptable point of view. We accept where we are. We accept how we're seen. We accept the job that we're in. We accept the way people view us. We accept all of the things that we have and all of the things we don't have. Because when you do that, you make peace with all that, and now you have a baseline to work from. Biological perspective in psychology. Biological perspective states that all thoughts and feelings and behaviors ultimately have a biological cause. It's one of the major perspectives in psychology. It involves such things as studying the brain, the genetics, the pheromones, and the immune and the nervous systems. So, for instance, there's people that have trauma in this life. If you're going to have trauma in this life, trauma is basically about the limbic system sitting above your brainstem. So the limbic system holds traumatic memory so that you will have a fight or flight response when there's anything that rubs up against those memories. So that your brain won't take the time to debate, it will go into automatic mode of fight or flight. So pheromones get released and your energy becomes different and your sensory perceptions all get very sharp in the way that whatever it's going to take for you to survive. If it's auditory, if it's visual, if it's smell, whatever it's going to take to survive, those sensory perceptions, whatever the brain perceives, is going to become heightened. That's our biological. So what happens is with the limbic system, as we store these traumatic memories in the limbic system, If you want to stimulate your eye movement, your optical nerve is tied to your memory glands, which are on the back of your brain on both sides. And so what happens is, as you stimulate your eye movement and you reprocess your traumatic events, your brain will restore. If you do it consistently and over and over again, your brain will restore what's in the limbic system back into the memory gland. So there's a window between the event and yourself, and you're no longer in fight or flight thinking of those traumatic events. That's what EMDR is all about: eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Therapists in biological perspective study biological genomics, consider how genes affect behavior. Now that the human genome is mapped, perhaps it will someday understand more precisely how behavior is affected by the DNA we inherit. So, for instance, I mentioned that, 36% of the male population are hunters. They are present day people. These are people, our history as human beings is utter boredom surrounded by war. And what that means is we are warring people. We have to have a good portion of our male population, and some females, be warriors. That means they have to be able to be soldiers. Well, soldiers kill. Soldiers are able to put things away in a box and not be disturbed by them. Soldiers are able to do horrible things and move on. Soldiers are able to hunt and kill. Soldiers are able to do things out of duty that most people would consider to be heinous and horrible and something you would go to prison for. And that's what soldiers are capable of. And we have to have them. We have to have them as human beings. But when you marry one, it's probably not going to be that emotionally empathetic and that emotionally attached to you. It's probably going to be loyal to you, but it's probably not going to be that deep emotional, empathetic, empath attachment that you're looking for, because their brain is not designed to do that. If it did, they would be terrible soldiers. So that's an example of a biological factor. Chromosomes, hormones, the brain all have significant influence on human behavior. For instance, your gender. Gender has a huge impact on a person's behavior. The biological approach believes that most behavior is inherited and has an adaptive evolutionary function. And the truth is, there's probably even a genetic factor to the fact that people are transy and gay and bi and all that stuff. They probably have a weaker male predisposition than most, but that's not been fully determined. But the truth is, there's a lot of biological factors that most of us are not aware of that make us up as who we are. As a matter of fact, there is a project out there that's an incredible project. It's a breakdown of your human genes. It's called DNA 360. DNA 360 breaks down your top 100 genes, and it gives you basically a book about yourself genetically. Why you can't eat certain things, what you're probably going to die of, what are the things that you have to look out for, how you can live 20 years longer, what kind of supplements work for you, what supplements don't work for you, why your attitude is the way it is, why you're genetically predisposition to anger, why you have problems listening, why you have problems being married, why you have ED. All of these things happen in our genetics. And that's a huge component of who we are. DNA 360 is $500, but it breaks all that stuff down, and it's a pretty darn good answer these days to helping you understand how your body is functioning and why it's not performing the way you want it to. This also biological approach has an evolutionary function. Testosterone deprived men are less likely to wander off in search of new mates or inseminate. They're also less aggressive, which is useful when there is a baby around. The biological male, if their testosterone drops down, is going to be much more of a gatherer, much more adaptive, much more friendly, much more of somebody that women can be compatible with. But they're not necessarily what a woman is looking for to breed with. Therefore, we have affairs and all kinds of crazy stuff. So men's testosterone can go up and go down based on their life and their situation and their biology. Many biological psychologists have concentrated on abnormal behavior and tried to explain it. For example, biological psychologists believe that schizophrenia is affected by levels of dopamine, a neurotransmitter. These findings help psychiatry take off and help relieve the symptoms of mental illness through drugs. However, Freud and other disciplines would argue that this just treats symptoms and not the case. This is where health psychologists take the finding that biological psychologists produce and look at the environmental factors that are involved in getting a better picture. So, what I'm trying to say is all theories play into each other, all theories help each other. But if you look at it from a biological perspective, that's where psychiatrists work. That's where supplements and medication can help the human being. For instance, if you have a depressed person and they're taking, let's say, an antidepressant like Effexor or something like that, they're going to get dopamine and serotonin. Now, what does that do? Well, it opens up neurological highways that are originally back alleys and turns them into superhighways so that you can think more clearly through your executive functioning, which is called the prefrontal cortex. So instead of your hippocampus, your emotions running the show, because your hippocampus is your raw emotions, and people that are depressed, especially people that are anxious, people that are fear-based, are going to live in their hippocampus. They're going to live in their emotions. They think it's their intuition. It's not. It's just their stupid emotions. But the bottom line is they listen to their emotions. They wait on their feelings. I don't feel like going to work. I don't feel like doing this. So they procrastinate because they're always waiting on a feeling. If you want to be not depressed, not anxious, you have to go to your prefrontal cortex and do what you freaking need to do. Go to work on time, get dressed, take the freaking bath, do what you're supposed to do, and then check in with how you feel. That's called survival. People on antidepressants have a better shot at that because their prefrontal cortex will start running the show, the executive functioning, rather than waiting on a feeling, because you're not going to have a lot of great feelings. Then there's this weird thing called evolutionary psychology. And the central claim of evolutionary psychology is that the brain, and therefore the mind, evolved to solve problems encountered by our hunter-gatherer ancestors during the Pleistocene period over 10,000 years ago. Evolutionary approach explains behavior in terms of the selective pressures that shape behavior. Most behaviors that we see display are believed to have developed during the EEA, the environment of evolutionary adaptation to help us survive. That's called childhood. Observed behavior is likely to develop because it's adaptive. It has been naturally selected. So people who are best adapted to survive and reproduce, their behaviors may even be sexually selected. Individuals who are most successful in gaining access to mates leave behind more offspring. So what are we talking about? Well, there's people that have the will to survive, and then there's the vast majority of people that are worthless as can be and mediocre. And if you drop them in the middle of the jungle, they'd be dead within a week. People that have a will are going to be dropped in the middle of the jungle and they'll figure it out. They'll figure out how to survive. They will find a way. They will find a way to hedge every possible bet to survive. There are fewer and fewer and fewer of those people nowadays because our evolution is evolving into a very soft, safe creature that lives in its head rather than its body. Therefore, what is still attractive are the ones that are physical, the ones that actually have a brain and are physical with their body. Those are very attractive people. The ones that are fat and sassy and, sit around eating their potato chips and playing video games and sitting online watching social media all day long, gaining to be 400, 500 pounds, are going to be left behind. And that's the vast majority of our population. We are a bunch of lazy, safe people that live in our heads. And as the evolution of humankind goes by, we are going to stop breeding. We're going to stop getting married because evolutionarily, we don't need to. We don't need to have 8 kids to have one survive anymore because all of the 8 kids survive now because we're safe. And the deal is that we're soft as human beings. And so eventually, as we live in our head, because if you think about it, hyper intelligent people love their own hypothesis, love to live in their head. This, like Seattle, the psychological capital of the world, they live in their head, they live in their hypothesis, they think they're God, and they love to come to their own conclusions, and they love to buy their own hypothesis as if that's the truth. And that's how they live, and they want to impose that on every other human being on the planet Earth because they're God and their hypotheses are all correct in their mind, even though they're untested. And even when they are tested, they deny the fact that the hypothesis doesn't work because they are so smart and they're so godlike and they're so incredibly intelligent and moralistic people, even though they're the ones out burning people's Teslas and protesting and acting like idiots. The strength of the approach, evolutionary, explains behaviors that appear dysfunctional, such as anorexia, behaviors that make little sense in modern contexts, like our biological stress response when finding that we're overdrawn at the bank. So, there's all kinds of perspectives and different theories, but understanding the evolutionary approach, you can't deny it. There's a huge evolutionary aspect to our human race, and the deal is that our evolution continues. We evolve as a species. All species evolve. We as human beings are evolving into a very soft, brain-oriented idiots sitting around eating potato chips and acting like we're gods. And eventually we'll blow each other up with a nuclear bomb, and hopefully everything will start all over. Or God will come and save us all. Therefore, the conclusion, there's so many different perspectives in psychology to explain different types of behavior and give different angles. No one perspective has explanatory powers over the rest. But what's important to understand is we have to have respect for there is an evolving idea of what psychology is and how it can help you. That's our show. I want to thank you for listening. I love hearing from you. You can do that on our webpage at libsyn.com, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, behavioral psychology is pulling habits out of rats. Also, you can't improve what you won't face or own. Also, self-assessment is the first step to all assessment. Thanks for listening.